Hello, friends. I first heard this story years ago from a vlogger who did an adventure series about exploring abandoned places. He told me it was a real urban legend that happened in a monastery high up in the Carpathians. It's an area of Eastern Europe known for its dense forests and terrifying folklore. And there's a certain sadness to these kinds of stories that I really love. So here it is. It all started when our hero, let's call him Brother Thomas, was sent to the archives room of the monastery. The abbot wanted him to catalog the ancient texts so they could be more easily studied. Thomas thought this was a great honor. He was a young monk, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, eager to please. But he soon discovered that there was a big problem. Someone kept messing with the manuscripts. You see, the archive was basically just a dusty old closet. There were no climate controls or security cameras or anything. In fact, it wasn't even locked. They didn't even lock it because nobody ever went in there except for the caretaker, an old blind woman who came to sweep every few days. But something was happening. Pages were constantly being shuffled around. Books were being left open to random parts, and sometimes whole sections of manuscripts were completely missing. Now, before you think that maybe it was just mice or drafts, let me assure you, they checked for that. The building was well maintained, and there was no sign of any animals. Also, some of the manuscripts were chained to the wall, like you can see right here, so it wasn't like someone could pull one of those out or move them around or something. No, whatever was happening was supernatural. Thomas thought it might be poltergeist activity, but then he discovered something that gave him the chills. Every night at exactly 3:33 a.m., the old bell tower would chime exactly 3 times. He could feel the vibration in his bones. But whenever he rushed over to the window, he saw nothing. The monks had never heard the bell either. Apparently, it only woke Thomas up. After hearing the bell one night, he searched everywhere. He looked out the window, but there was nothing outside. The bell was old and hadn't been rung in decades. In fact, he couldn't even get up into the tower himself because the stairs were covered by debris. He looked around and found an old rusty key hidden in a loose brick, and when he put it in the door at the top, it opened. He went up and discovered that the bell was operated by a rope that was dangling limply down the shaft. Since Thomas couldn't climb up there himself, he enlisted the help of the caretaker. She climbed up and inspected it and said that it definitely wasn't wind. If that were the case, the rope wouldn't be dangling like that. Whoever was ringing the bell was up here and she could feel the vibrations too. From then on, they decided that someone would stay awake with Thomas every night until they could figure out what was going on. But each night, just as the others arrived, the bell rang and they saw Thomas's empty bed. Of course, they found this very unsettling. Was he losing his mind? Did something take him? Were these manuscripts cursed? Finally, Thomas convinced them to let him go back to his research alone. He was determined to get to the bottom of this. So day after day, night after night, he studied the ancient texts looking for answers. Finally, he found something that gave him goosebumps. It was a manuscript he'd almost skipped over, but something made him pull it out and read it again. This was no ordinary text. It was a diary of sorts written by a former monk who lived hundreds of years ago. At first, Thomas thought it was crazy. The monk claimed that demons and spirits were everywhere, whispering to him, trying to corrupt him. He wrote that he battled against them with prayer and holy water, but they followed him and tormented him. But then he turned the page and his blood ran cold because he discovered that the author was actually talking about the bell and how it was different than all the other bells. He wrote that this bell was an artifact of unimaginable power, and that whoever rang it was summoning a watcher between worlds. With this new knowledge, Thomas realized that this watcher was the source of all their problems. That's why they felt the vibrations but couldn't find the source. That's why pages were missing. That's why the bell was rung at exactly 3:33. Now he understood. The watcher between worlds only came when the clock struck 3:33. It would reach through the veil and briefly touch our world. Then it would grab something from the monastery and take it back with it. He knew that he had to do something to stop it. But what? Well, it just so happened that further on in the diary, the author mentioned that there was an antidote. You see, he made a deal with the Watcher, promising it certain things in exchange for his soul, and when the time comes, he can call upon the Watcher and reclaim his soul. This was the only way to stop it, to ring the bell and confront the Watcher. But the question was, what did the Watcher want? What did the author promise it? He pored over the pages, frantically searching for the answer, and finally he found it. The author promised the Watcher his manuscript, the very one he was writing in. So Thomas realized that if he wanted to stop the Watcher, he would have to do the same. He would have to offer it something precious in exchange for his soul. And so on the last night he wrote one last entry in the diary, bidding farewell to his future self and promising the Watcher the manuscript in exchange for his soul. Then he walked up to the bell tower. In his hand, he held a chain heavy with age and significance. He raised it above his head and brought it crashing down on the bell. The sound reverberated through the mountain, echoing through the halls of the monastery. And as the first rays of sunlight peeked through the window, the other monks awoke and came running. They were confused and scared and worried. They didn't know what was going on. They could hear the bell tolling in the distance. And when they finally arrived in the archive room, they found no trace of Thomas. But that's not even the scariest part. Check this out. On the floor lay the diary, and a new page had been written in. And on that page the author spoke of a young monk named Thomas who heard the bell calling him, promising him his soul. And then he described the bargain he made with the Watcher, how he gave it the diary in exchange for his soul. But then the author spoke of something else. He warned his future self that the Watcher would return for the diary, and he described the bargain he had made. And then he wrote this: "Whoever rings the bell at 3:33 shall take my place, and the Watcher will come for him at dawn." And sure enough, when the monks looked out the window, they saw the faint outline of a cloaked figure walking away from the monastery. As they watched, the sun rose higher and higher in the sky, slowly turning that figure from a shadow into a solid, unmistakable shape. They stood there mesmerized, knowing that they weren't watching a ghost, but a living, breathing human being walking away from the monastery. Then one of the monks asked, "Who's that?" And the others shook their heads. They didn't know. They had no idea that one of their own would answer the call of the bell, but they knew it would happen again, because that's what the diary said. And so it began again, the cycle of the bell ringing at 3:33 and a single monk answering the call. But who will be next? Thanks for watching, friends. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, please leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Your support keeps this channel alive and lets us bring you even more creepy, mysterious content. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.